Happy Sunday, everybody. So every Sunday, what I like to do is go over my best of one meta breakers. And this week, we've got a pretty good selection. I'm going to be covering more than four. Part of this is because I'm going to be taking a quick little break, so I will not be around next weekend. You're gonna miss a week of me, but then I'll be back to cover the Duskmorn material, and maybe the last week before Duskmorn. We'll see how it works out. So, if you're new here, these are all decks that were successfully piloted to Mythic with no MMR shenanigans. They were over a 60% win rate for at least 50 games. So the first one we're going to talk about here is Supreme Domain by AKA Yeti. They went 55 and 28 for 66%. The deck is good against mono red, mono black, Boros, and Orzhov. Struggles a little bit against the Rakdos aggro with the Fling. This is similar to the other domain lists that we've seen, but taking a slight variation of, instead of running Atraxa as the main win condition, we're playing around with Niv Mizzet. So you get a 5/5 flying hexproof from monocolored spells, which can be really problematic for certain matchups that are looking for mono white removal. And then each instant and sorcery in your graveyard that's exactly 2 colors has Jumpstart, so you're able to recast your Lightning Helix by discarding a card. Jumpstart is you can cast it, discard a card, and then you exile the card that you cast. So you kind of have this like alternative burn strategy with Lightning Helix. Doppelgang too, like you know, this is an alternative win condition. Pillage the Bog to help us find our cards. Assassin's Trophy for some removal. Up the Beanstalk and Heaped Harvest, part of the domain core, and the Ancient Cornucopia, which allows us to gain more life off of the Lightning Helix. So it's leaning a little bit more heavily into this synergy, even though there's only one Ancient Cornucopia. I've seen some lists that run a little bit higher on this instead of the 4 Heaped Harvests, but this one seems to be the double ramp and life gain off of this is pretty good. Synergies too, if you're not familiar with Domain, is Leyline Binding with Up the Beanstalk works particularly well in the Domain space. This leaning heavily off of the double lands, that kind of, you know, since we don't have the triomes, you definitely need the cards that are multiple basic land types in one, to help you get that Domain. We have Ill-Timed Explosion as a way to kind of reset the board against the early aggression. Urgent Necropsy can be really good against certain matchups that have both enchantments and creatures and planeswalkers, especially the Boros matchup. And Boros primarily right now is the Caretaker control list, less so the Boros Convoke strategy. Deadly Cover-Up event for another Wrath. Roxanne gives you both ramp and removal. Make Your Own Luck gives you some really good value. And we've got the Herd Migration as a typical win condition. So it's just like it's an alternative take on Domain, and might be worth checking out. So there's not going to be a poll this week because of my schedule. So I won't be doing a gameplay video, but I'll be back to do gameplay videos in the future, and I might play one of these just kind of to check it out and see how it goes. So number 2 here is Mardu Mice by Mirror. Went 64 and 32 for a 67% win rate. It's good against the other Boros decks, which is primarily the Caretaker's control decks. It's good against Rakdos, and it's good against Azorius control. And its worst matchup is mono red. So the disruption that they can use with the shocks and the lightning strikes on your early pressure, and then you lose a little bit to the inconsistencies of bringing in the second color, because the strategies are very similar, right? You're leaning off of the mouse synergies, off of Manifold Mouse being able to give you double strike. You've got the Heartfire Hero and the Emberheart Challenger, which are both good to target with the Valiant, which this deck I think triggers the Valiant a little bit easier. We've got the Quest Caller to do the Lord thing for the mice, and we've got one copy of the Lava Spur Boots, which we've seen more in the best of 3 space than in best of 1. and this does look like it's a best of 3 sideboard. So sometimes I grab a best of 3 list accidentally, but I think it was doing well in best of 1. And but we've got like a little bit of shock here for the slick shot show off, and otherwise it's just combat tricks to boost the Valiant. And what's interesting about this one is that usually you don't see Mardu because of how it's already worst. The worst thing about this deck is the mana. Bringing in the black increases that inconsistency, but then it helps you against Rakdos by being able to kind of play their own game and potentially get the turn 3 lethal off of flinging your Heartfire Hero for triple damage off the Callous Sellsword. So you don't necessarily need to bring in the black to be able to play the Callous Sellsword, but every once in a while you are able to actually play it out as a relatively large creature. I haven't played this deck personally, but I think I would be tempted to just be running this as Boros and not worry about playing the Callous Sellsword. Number 3 is Builder's Jewel by Angus McFife. Went 94 and 55 for a 63% win rate, and wasn't just like some of the decks do really well in Diamond and then just like park it once they hit Mythic, and others continue to play the archetype into Mythic, and McFife was playing this one into Mythic and doing quite well. And so of the ones this week, this would probably be the one that I would be the most interested in playing and checking out. It's built off of the Enigma Jewel that we got back in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, which allows you to craft with 4 or more non-lands with activated abilities. Then you get a legendary artifact that lets you cast all of those activated abilities and copy them. So, and additional other activated abilities other than it also get copied. So that's kind of like the theme of the deck, is you have a lot of these artifacts that have a activated cost to be able to sacrifice and gain life, draw a card, or to loot and create a treasure token. And Builder's Talent then allows you to also bring back your stuff from your graveyard, as well as being able to put a +1/+1 counter onto one of your creatures. Now, there's not a whole lot of creatures in this list with the Kutzel's Flanker and the tokens coming off of the Eternal Wanderer, but you've also got the Repair and Recharge, which allows you to return an artifact from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I was curious to see if we were going to see more of like a Portal to Phyrexia kind of thing going on with this, but leaning more into one with the multiverse, which can give you an incredible amount of value. And we've also got the Jace, which can help us kind of mill into being able to do our Enigma Jewel. And then the other thing too is activated abilities count, like Planeswalkers, their loyalty is an activated ability. So you can you can craft with your Eternal Wanderer and your Jace to get a Jace that will trigger multiple times, or Eternal Wanderer that will trigger multiple times. We've got the Hornlock Whale here for a little bit of like tempo disruption, being able to bounce something. The instant speed interaction from Get Lost, Abrade, and Torch the Tower to help up against the mono red and things like that. This deck is good against mono red, it's good against Rakdos, it's good against the Caretaker's Control, and it's good against Golgari Midrange. The deck that it struggles with is Azorius Control. We're starting to see a little bit more of Azorius pop up, although it's still not a very popular pick on the ladder. So, looks like a fun deck in theory. And then we've got the Kutzel's Flanker here, which can kind of help up against the, not only does it help stabilize against mono red, but also the Graveyard Hate is kind of relevant since more people are running the 4-color combo deck that I showcased yesterday. So, yeah, really cool build. I think it looks like a lot of fun. So I did just double check, and it, even though it was a best of 3 list, it was being run in best of 1. And so this one is Boros Mice by King Neptune, which also looks like a best of 3 list that was being run in best of 1. And we've got but this one is doing a similar thing to what Mirror was doing with the Mardu Mice, with just not bringing in the black. So you have a little bit more of a consistent mana base. And we've got War Leader's Call here, which I think was an interesting inclusion as a one-of to kind of help up against the mid-range and control and give the deck a little bit longer reach. And we've also got still got the core of the Manifold Mouse and the Emberheart Challenger General Mice Valiant strategies. Lost Jite instead of the Lava Spur Boots is one that I have explored in the past and think is definitely a reasonable option because it can kind of help you ramp, can help get your damage through and do some cool stuff. Not to mention the reason why you're including these cheap equipments is because if you have an equip cost of 1, you can trigger your Valiant for 1, and you can move it around throughout your whole team. So it can be really good for extending the Valiant plays in the deck. This one is not running the Lord, so we're not seeing the Valley Quest Caller here, and some slight variations between the two lists, but similar, mice go get them. And let's see, did I mention this? So this one was 39 and 16 for 71%. Was good against the Orzhov and Celestia decks, and bad against, or I should say worse, not necessarily bad, but worse against Mono Red and Rakdos. Those being two tough matchups for Boros Mice to try to survive their aggression, especially when you're on the draw. Oh, and the inclusion of Nettleguard, I think I wanted to just mention really quickly. I think there's enough artifact and enchantment hate that we're starting to see that, like, I like the Nettleguard inclusion on this list. All right, we've got Orzhov Midrange by Serial Kellogg's, went 67 and 34 for 66% win rate into Mythic. It was good against Mono Red, Mono Black, and Rakdos, which are the three that I really primarily look for. It's a little bit worse in the matchup against the Boros Caretaker's control deck, but not just a complete blowout. And so this one is not doing the Orzhov discard list. It's not doing the Pixie bounce thing, right? We're just looking at like really good mid-range threats. Zoraline being able to bring things back, Shieldred, classic life stabilization, same with Beza, Aclazotz, and Virtue of Persistence. So looking through this list, like what I see is a lot of ways to stabilize against Mono Red, and then some life gain. We do have some hand hate, so we have Liliana of the Veil, and the Aclazotz is a little bit of hand hate, but not too bad, to affect the control matchup. And we've got some board sweepers, so we've got the Shrouded Shepherd to give everything -1/-1. Not a huge fan of the Shrouded Shepherd personally, but can work out if you're up against, hop to it, can line up okay with it. So we've got Cut Down and Disfigure instead of just running one or the other, and I thought that was kind of an interesting one. The pros to this one is that you're able to kind of affect Mono Red aggro and Rakdos aggro a little bit better, so that the Heartfire hero doesn't hit you, that you can hit the Slick Shot Show Off, and they don't play around it with combat tricks. A little bit worse outside of that matchup, where the Cut Down then comes in handy. Pest Control also, and the Legions to Ashes, I think helps against the go wide strategies, especially the Celestia Rabbits, where you can eliminate a whole bunch of the tokens. Deep Cavern Bat for disruption, classic, go for the throat for removal. Preacher is a really great mid-range threat, giving you that card draw value, and 1/1 lifelink tokens can be particularly stabilizing. One copy of Gix here for the classic Deep Cavern Bat Gix combo. And we've got Season of the Burrow, which I like this card in control. I think we're going to start seeing it a little bit more. Being able to remove 2 permanents and then have them draw cards is pretty spicy. Not to mention bringing back a invincible, Zoraline. Like, the versatility of what you can do with this card is quite impressive. And then we're also combining it with Virtue of Loyalty. So if you do create 5 1/1 tokens, you can then start growing those into 2/2s and 3/3s, and kind of gives you an alternative win condition outside of just out grinding them with value. And the last two here are just like classic old archetypes. Nothing new going on here, right? So these would probably not make the list, just because I like to try to out new archetypes. But Golgari Midrange is relatively well positioned if you aren't bumping into Boros. The Caretaker's control deck is a little bit tricky for this one as well. Glissa Sunslayer can help with that, because whenever it connects, you do destroy an enchantment, so you can get rid of that. It also could be that it's also not great against Boros Convoke, which we're not seeing as much. But the go wide strategies like Celestia Rabbits, generally this deck is trying to answer things one for one, and anything that's doing that go wide strategy is difficult for the Golgari Midrange. But it's really good against the mono red and Rakdos and mono black, because if you do want to answer them one for one, this deck has a lot of tools to do so, right? We've got the 2 copies of Gix to go with the Deep Cavern Bat, 2 copies of the Mosswood Dread Knight for the recurring draw. Terra Sunder gives us some artifact hate and like that inclusion. So this is not doing the Vraska 1-turn kill with the Innkeeper's Talent. And I've seen more and more lists that are doing the talentless Golgari build popping up in Mythic, and definitely something to explore. That there's pros and cons to both, right? And so right now, I think leaning just fully heavily into countering the aggro that we've seen in the first week of the new season looks beneficial. Acklezotz is a really great stabilizing threat and a difficult threat to remove outside of exile. Virtue of Persistence giving you the early stabilization against mono red while giving you a late game win con, and then Shieldred being classic old Shieldred. So if you're a fan of Golgari Midrange, I think this week looked particularly good for it. And 27 True Runes was able to take it 50 and 28 for 64% win rate. It's well done. And last but not least is Simic Cookies. And Simic Cookies has been, it was struggling a little bit at the beginning because of everybody being on that Rakdos aggro deck. And it struggles a little bit against the mono, like the Rakdos aggro and the mono red, right? So if you're experiencing a whole bunch of that, then Simic Cookies is not going to be the answer for you. But it does do well against mono black. It does do well against the Golgari midrange decks and the Orzhov midrange and discard decks as well. So we've got hard-hitting question and bushwhack, both for a little bit more interaction than we usually see. Ditching the graveyard synergies to be able to give the activated abilities is curious. Hunter's Talent, though, is removal and being able to give yourself that like card draw off of your, Zoetic Glyph and things like that. Interesting inclusion to run the Hunter's Talent. But we've got the classic like Cookies, Ginger Brute, the Tough Cookie, Lost Jite, which I've explored and like in the archetype. Teething Wormlet has a lot of really great synergies with all the artifacts. Spyglass Siren also creates an artifact with a map token that you can then later animate. Same with this, gives you map tokens every time it enters and attacks. And then we've got the Schooner, which can be really nice for Spyglass Siren or Teething Wormlet, just being able to kind of ramp into some early aggression. So as long as you're not up against the mono red and Rakdos aggro decks, this one looks pretty decent right now, as more people are playing the Golgari and kind of like mid-range decks. So 63 and 34 for 65% win rate. Not sure I said that. Probably having multiple repeats this morning, but whew. All right, there you go. 7 off-meta archetypes that are looking pretty well positioned this week. I hope you enjoy exploring them, and I'll be back in 2 weeks to cover my top archetypes of the week. And I think let me look at my calendar really quick. So in 2 weeks Duskmourn comes out on September 24th. So I will be able to do a best of 1, best of 3 meta review before we go into Duskmourn. And then, so you guys actually probably won't hear from me until the 29th. So it might be 2 weeks off. Anyway, I'll do my best. I know you're very, very concerned about when I'm going to be on. Take care, everybody. Thanks for being a part of my community, and good luck climbing the ladder.